For the month of August, I've chosen to talk about a theme called, I want to talk about creating sacred spaces. So I've taken very, very brief readings from the four Gospels that talk about how to create sacred space. First one is from Matthew chapter 6. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. From Mark's Gospel. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. From Luke's Gospel. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. And from John's Gospel. My house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. And finally from John, Jesus told the Samaritan woman, the time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. True worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. These are words inspired by God. So for the month of August, I've chosen a theme. If I were to give it a kind of an overall kind of title, I would call it The Slippery Slide from Mystical Revelation to Barbaric Theocracies. And so today I'm going to focus on creating sacred space. And the next Sunday, with God's help, I'm going to look at corrupting sacred space. And then on the 17th, I'll do a recap and a Q&A. So today the focus is going to be on creating sacred space. And I want to start in a strange place. I remember many years ago reading a book called Zigzag Zen, Buddhism and Psychedelics. And it was a kind of an anthology whose purpose was to explore the intersection between Buddhism and psychedelic experiences, asking whether these substances can offer meaningful spiritual insight or pose risks to the Buddhist path. And the contributors were people like Ralph Metzner, Rick Strassman, Joan Halifax, Ram Dass, Jack Cornfield, Terence McKenna, and Lama Surya Das. But the message I took away from that book, when I look back on it, was the following. That it seems when people do psychedelic encounters, that there are four important S's. They call them the four S's. It's called set, setting, substance, and sitter. So set has to do with the mindset. What is the mindset with which the person undertakes such a journey? You know, are they kind of going, is it like a kind of just to get high, or to have a spiritual experience? So what's the sacred intention behind the exercise? And the second one is the setting. What is the sacred space, or what is the tradition in which they're doing whatever it is they're doing, whether it's ayahuasca or peyote or whatever it is. So the setting is really important. There's a huge difference between trying to do it at a rave or doing it, you know, in the mountains someplace. So the setting was the second S. And the third one was the substance. You know, what particular substance are they ingesting? You know, so what kind of a sacrament are they encountering? And then the fourth one was the sitter. Who's the priest or the shaman or the guide for the experience, so that somebody is going through with somebody who has lots of experience in the area. So they were the four S's that I learned from that particular book. And it reminded me of the notion of morphogenetic fields, because I believe that morphogenetic fields are the basis of all altered states of consciousness. And today I want to focus just on three examples of morphogenic fields. I want to look at nature as a morphogenic field. I want to look at mantras as a morphogenic field. And then I want to look at ritual and liturgy as a morphogenic field. So starting with nature. Nature obviously is filled with morphogenetic fields, like in the field of gravity or electromagnetism. In fact, Rupert Sheldrake, the great English biologist, talks about the fact that nature actually doesn't have laws, it has habits. It develops particular kinds of habits, and then it sees, you know, how successful the habit is, and then it repeats it. So nature will always repeat successful inventions. Nature will come up with an invention, and if it's successful, it'll keep repeating it. So for instance, 540 million years ago, the eye had not been invented. And then the first little creature to develop an eye was called the trilobite. So we're talking about 540 million years ago. And nature realized that eyes are really, really successful. So let's repeat this, you know, in subsequent kind of creatures. Another great one for me was the kind of the evolution of the notion of a family. Nature tried, family and found out, was that successful or not? And it was hugely successful. So up to then, we only had amphibians, and amphibians don't have families. Amphibians just lay eggs and then they bugger off. So kind of a turtle will lay eggs in the sand, cover them, and then go off and never lay sight on them again. Snakes the same. Snakes lay eggs and they bugger off and have no connection with the progeny. Mammals are totally different. Mammals was a kind of a new habit that nature created, where there would be two parents whose job was to feed and protect the young. So mammals came on the scene about 225 million years ago. So again and again and again, nature has habits, and if the habits are successful, it'll keep repeating the habits. So the notion of family has become hugely important in the evolution of life on our planet. And particularly the notion of the mother and the infant. The infant, suckling at the mother's breast. And the part of the infant is not faith. The child is not making a kind of a cerebral acknowledgement. I believe there will be a breast awaiting me. It's not a rational kind of an expectation. Rather, it's a soulful trust that there will be a mother who will love me, cuddle me, hold me, and feed me. And on the part of the mother, it's not about duty, it's about love. It's the instinct of motherhood to give love. And so I believe actually that the first and most important morphogenetic field is love itself. So I believe before there was space, before there was time, before there was energy, and before there was matter, there was love. And so reducing breastfeeding to simply kind of a selfish infant sucking milk from a captive mammary gland is the trap of secular biology. That may be what is happening, but it is not why it is happening. Because the trust of the baby is actually soul programmed. It's not just a quirk of evolution. So I see in nature this extraordinary ability to create morphogenetic fields and then repeat the ones which are successful. Secondly, I want to look at the notion of the mantra. And you find mantras in many, many different spiritual traditions. So for instance, I believe that in the Christian religion, that the Our Father, the Pater Noster, actually is a mantra. And it's the mantra, the only mantra taught to us by Jesus. So repeating the Our Father in whatever language, for me, is an extraordinary mantra, and it creates a morphogenetic field. I believe actually that the rosary dedicated to the Mother Mary, I would call it an extended mantra. The repetition of Pater Nosters and Ave Marias, and Glory be to the Fathers. So for me, that's an extended kind of a mantra. And one of the ways in which I prayed is just to kind of realize that the words themselves create a mantra and a kind of an altered state of consciousness. Within Hinduism, you have the notion, this beautiful statement, Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that. That when you look into the core of what is, and you find the seed of life in it, that is who you are. And the seed of life, ultimately, is God's love. And so the realization in Hinduism that when you really understand love, you're looking at the divine inside yourself. And so you'll say to other people, Namaste. The divine in me recognizes and honors the divine in you. So mantras are extraordinarily beautiful ways, very, very simple ways of creating a morphogenetic field. In Buddhism, you have this beautiful notion, they call it Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dharmam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the teaching, I take refuge in the community. So there's kind of a mantra, a Buddhist mantra. And in Judaism, you got the most, very, very famous one, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one. So for me, mantras are a very, very powerful way of creating altered states of consciousness and actually creating a morphogenetic field. So that other people who come after us, they're relying on that field, they're tapping into that field and they're drawing from that field. It's not just simply that the person who recites the mantra is having an altered state of consciousness, but that we're helping to create a morphogenetic field which makes it easier for other people to come in and to kind of plug into that kind of energy. And then thirdly, I want to talk about ritual and liturgy as, morphogenetic fields. I would say that every level of the body or every sheath of the body has different kinds of receptors. So the physical body itself, the receptors are sensorium. So sound and light and smell and taste and touch. But also at a physical level, making the sign of the cross, or genuflecting, or standing at some stage, or sitting at some stage, or kneeling at some stages. And in Judaism, you have the notion of davening when they're praying, particularly at the kotel, at the Wailing Wall. The idea of bowing again continually as they pray. So that's a physical one. Among the Sufis, you have the whirling dervishes, that they're using dance and whirling in order to create the kind of the altered state of consciousness and create, a different morphogenetic field. The notion of bowing before the Blessed Sacrament or beating the breast. Beating the breast is not to say, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner. That is not the purpose of beating your breast. The purpose of beating your breast is to wake up your heart. It is to get out of the rational mind and get into heart space. Because I believe there's a huge difference between knowledge and wisdom. That knowledge is simply data which are generated by the sensorium and processed by the brain, whereas wisdom is data that are generated by the soul and processed by the heart. So beating your breast is not about saying, I'm a schmuck, I'm a schmuck, I'm a schmuck, but rather saying, wake up my heart, because only through my heart space can I really encounter the divine. So at the physical level, there are all the different ways, in which we experience morphogenetic fields, or create them as well. They're not the etheric level, the next level of body. They're the energy created by thoughts and words. They can create tulpas or halos or egregores. So our thought process themselves are creating, morphogenetic fields. And then at the soul level, the soul self, prayer and meditation are also creating morphogenetic fields. So we're tapping in to the morphogenetic fields of countless other people who came before us, and through their prayer and meditation have created this extraordinary ocean in which we can bathe. And we're not just tapping into it, we're adding to it as well. I believe that the Logos is the morphogenetic agent. At the beginning of John's Gospel, where John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were created by him, and without him was made nothing that was made. In him was life, and this life was the light of human beings. So the Logos itself, the Word of God, is a morphogenetic agent as well. So listening to the Word of God as people are reading from the Scriptures or from any sacred tradition, whether it's a mythological tradition or an oral tradition, that in some senses, is a morphogenetic field generated by the Logos, by the spoken word. I believe that thin places, what we call in Gaelic, ÓLaoire, that thin places are created and they're animated and they're maintained by hundreds of years and millions of devotees. That we can create these sacred spaces, we can create these thin places, and we can animate them and maintain them in the tradition of our elders, those who have gone before us. And so in some senses, the Latin Mass was really, really powerful way of creating sacred space. You have a Latin Mass. You have extraordinary architecture, these medieval cathedrals. The acoustics were extraordinary. You had stained glass windows, and you had multi-modality kind of experiences. And then you had this Gregorian chant in a language you didn't understand, but that even raised your consciousness further. So for me, there are some of the ways in which we encounter morphogenetic fields. I want to look then at water and light. I'm sure most of you have heard about the work of an extraordinary Japanese scientist called Masaru Emoto, who worked with water crystals. He would take water and he would play music in front of it, or he would write something on it, and he would try different kinds of music, and then he would crystallize the water and watch what kinds of forms the crystals took. And so what he found out was that, different kinds of sounds created radically different kinds of crystallization. Or even written messages. He would tape a message to a glass of water and have an intention behind it, love or compassion or whatever. And he would try different kinds of music. So he tried, for instance, classical music versus heavy metal. And they created totally different patterns of crystals. The classical music would create these extraordinary, elegant crystallization processes, and the heavy metal stuff created these weird looking shapes. Now, I think the same thing is true, that we get heavy metals in our water. So where I live up here, for instance, I've been up here now nearly 30 years, and I had to do, I have a well which goes down 260 feet. But when it comes up, there are heavy metals in it, and it's very hard water, and I'm storing it in a big, big tank, 10,000 gallon tank. So I have to do a 3-part cleansing. I have to try to take the heavy metals out of it to soften the water and to kill bacteria through ultraviolet radiation. And so heavy metals in water is not just a symbolic thing, it's actually a physiological reality. I believe actually that light is the transmitter of information and water is the storage of information. So light and water act together. And so we get, for instance, the notion of holy water. You go into a Catholic church and you dip your fingers into the holy water font and you bless yourself. Now, everybody who came before you, he is bringing the same kind of a mindset to it. And so in the creation of the font, and they're putting the water into it, and the people who attended the font, they're creating a morphogenetic field. You look at the waters of the Ganges in India, and literally millions and millions and millions of people over thousands of years have blessed the water of the Ganges by their intentionality and by their prayers. And so water, in some senses, is a storage for that kind of spiritual information. So then, absorbing the light and the sounds of the music and the chants and the prayer, and as well as the intentions and the faith and the energy of the congregation, and then the holy water dippers, in some senses, is the symbolic entry into that altered state of consciousness. And it's no accident that Gaia herself, the planet, is about 80% water, and the human body is about 80% water. And so we have this extraordinary storage facility. And light is beaming to us from the sun, and there is more information beamed from the sun in 5 minutes than of all the archives on planet Earth combined. And I believe that actually sunlight is a great driver of evolution on our planet. And suddenly you have this dance between light and water. So we know that there's so much light in the human body, they're called biophotons, that if you could release the light in a single human body, you could light up a baseball stadium at 1 million watts for 3 hours. So there's this extraordinary dance, even in the human body, between light and between water. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine, a researcher called Ed Reether, he wrote an excellent article, and I'm using some quotations from it with Ed's permission this morning. And here's what he had to say. He said, Ed is a real expert in Hindu religions, early Christian religions, and plant medicines. And he said, the renewed interest in psychedelics, substances like LSD and psilocybin and ayahuasca, are increasingly used in clinical, therapeutic, and spiritual settings. These substances, he said, offer initiatory glimpses into altered states of consciousness, but they often lack the sacred frameworks and the initiatory containers and the relationship depth that's characterized by the true sacraments of old. And so again, it's what he said at the very beginning, the S's, the set, the setting, the substance, and the sitter. So what Ed is saying, that in this revival of plant medicines in the West, it signals both a revived hunger for transcendence and at the same time a confusion about its authentic transmission. So the sacraments of the ancient world then are not just stories. They were, to use his phrase, they were technologies of transcendence. And so I would say that I believe that the test of any true spirituality and of any mystical ritual is that it be a technology of transcendence. And that is what we attempt to create in our Eucharist every Sunday. That the Eucharist is not just a rite celebrating something that happened in an upper room 2,000 years ago, but that it's actually a technology of transcendence. And my prayer for myself and for you is, that you make it a technology of transcendence. That every part of the Eucharist, whether it's the music from Nancy, the readings from Michael, the Eucharistic prayer, whatever it is, that it be for you a technology of transcendence. Namaste, my brothers and sisters.